I'm never going to blame coach. I'm always going to blame myself or look at myself and figure out how I can win the game and help us win. So, but I would be lying if I said it was easy.
All right, that was Bradley Beal, who's now SKOR. I think the Wizards are like 0 for their last 8 or 10 when he scores 40 points, something like that. Like he's amazing and they're all terrible. Choose your own adventure. Do you want to, for Reckless Speculation Thursday, do you want to start with my Bradley Beal trade plan, or do you want to talk about the Deshaun Watson report from Adam Schefter?
Let's start with Beal.
Start with Beal?
Let's start with Beal.
Okay.
Let's go with Beal.
So, all right.
Reckless Speculation.
So Bradley Beal, there were videos and photos going around a couple nights ago of him sitting on the bench playing his old teammate John Wall with the Rockets. And it was a close game for a while, and the Rockets kind of pulled away, and Beal was sitting on the bench, like head in his hands, just sad, almost crying. And then yesterday, a reporter asked him, I can't remember what the exact question was, but it was like, are you unhappy? Are you frustrated? And he said, is the sky blue?
Great
so
line.
He's not happy. He's 27 years old. He's in his prime. He's a former top 5 overall pick, and he's leading the NBA with 35 points per game offensively. Not the best defensive player, but I would also argue that he's not really like engaged in playing defense for that team, and he doesn't have a ton of defensive infrastructure around him. Mm-hmm. So I think the question here, boys, is it possible for the Wolves to acquire Bradley Beal? And I understand how absurd that question sounds, because anyone outside of Minnesota would look and say, well, I mean, Bradley Beal is going to want to go play for a team that can win. Like, why would he want to go from the Washington Wizards to the Timberwolves? And I understand that logic, but number one, Bradley Beal doesn't necessarily get to dictate where he gets traded to. Now, he gets to dictate where he plays long-term after his contract is up, and we'll get there. But the second thing I will point you to is Gerson Rosas has been very frontal, including on this show, about wanting to acquire more superstar talents. They went out and they traded for D'Angelo Russell, who I don't think is a superstar talent, but like they're aggressively looking to make moves.
He'll take swings
to make Karl-Anthony Towns happy.
Yep.
And I think you could sell the idea, whether D'Lo is part of the trade or whether he stays, you could sell the idea to Bradley Beal of playing next to Karl-Anthony Towns, and Malik Beasley has turned into a force offensively, and say, listen, like we can put together a ridiculous offensive unit if we bring you in. So can you mentally engage with us here for a little while?
Okay.
I have 3 listed challenges that you would have to overcome to pull this off. All right. And you feel free to stop me as we go through this and just let me know what you're thinking on this too. But the first thing is the Timberwolves are over the salary cap by about $21 million. And if Spotrac.com is correct, they are $700,000 under the luxury tax mark. And if I'm Glenn Taylor and I'm paying $131.9 million, which is, like I said, $22 million over the salary cap for a team that's terrible, I'm not very happy to begin with. So I'm probably not willing to go over the luxury tax in a trade. Like, I want to keep it where we are, or ideally lower the amount of money I'm paying for this team.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So the first thing is, it's not like you have a bunch of cap space to just absorb Bradley Beal's contract. You'd have to sort of figure out. So we'll go through some of this stuff. But the first big challenge to pull off, I think, is do the Wolves have enough assets to make this trade? And by assets, I mean current players, draft picks. And the biggest hurdle on that front is their first-round pick for the 2021 draft is in question. It's headed to Golden State unless they stay in the top 3. And then if they stay in the top 3, that pick would be unprotected to Golden State in 2022. And the NBA has a rule that does not allow teams to trade back-to-back future first-round picks.
The Ted Stepien rule from the Cavaliers days.
So
great rule.
You would have to, because of the arrangement right now with Golden State and your first-round pick, you would have to acquire a second first-round pick for either this year or next year, depending on how this shakes out.
To send to them.
Like a late first-round pick or something.
Okay.
So that you could have the ability to trade back-to-back future first-round picks. And I don't think Bradley Beal is going to be acquired for a second-round pick. So
yeah, that's a pretty big hurdle right there that you just threw out.
Yeah. But it is possible. Like, could you trade? I don't know. I'm making this up. I mean, there was a time where didn't the Wolves trade a first-round pick for like that Michigan State big man? Adrian Payne, or I think it was Adrian Payne. They traded a first round
they
pick
did,
for.
and they really shouldn't have done that.
So like,
okay, but
like Rubio, there was a first round pick involved in the Rubio.
So you
trade,
don't have a first round pick to trade, but you do have the first overall pick from the 2020 draft to trade.
Yep. So you've got young players. You got Anthony Edwards, who would almost certainly have to be included just because of your lack of
absolutely
like draft pick flexibility here. So number one is, what assets do you have? And we'll come back to that in a second. Number two is making the salaries match. So because the Wolves have no cap space and because they're right up against the luxury tax, they would have to send over roughly $35 million worth of contracts to Washington to absorb what Bradley Beal's contract is set to be next year. Now, D'Lo is at $30 million. Would Washington even want him? I don't know. I think if they're going to take D'Lo, they would also want like first round pick or Ant Edwards. And
definitely.
And you can't completely gut everything else. It can't just be Beal and Cat. Like, you have to have players around those guys.
But Ant is gone then.
I don't know that that's 100% the case.
I think they demand him to make the trade. I think if you're Washington, you've got to demand that.
Almost certainly, depending on how they feel about D'Lo, they probably would rather have Anthony Edwards because he's cheaper and he's younger. I think you're probably right. So there's sort of two types of ways to make this work salary-wise. D'Lo and other things, like D'Lo, and if you can figure out your first-round pick situation, D'Lo and Culver and whatever. I would be really careful trading both D'Lo and Ant Edwards in this trade because, like, I guess you still have Malik Beasley, but I just feel like you got to have other players around these guys or you're just going to be the 9 seed in the Western Conference. You got to be a little bit careful. But if you decided to not trade D'Lo, if you wanted to say, listen, it's got to be Cat, Beal, and D'Lo as the big three, and Malik Beasley coming in, shooting threes, then to make it work salary-wise, you'd probably have to trade Rubio $17 million, Culver's $6 million, and Edwards $10 million, plus picks of some kind going forward. And then you'd be looking at a core of Cat, Beal, D'Lo, Malik Beasley, Naz Reid, and whoever else, like Jared Vanderbilt, Josh Okogie, Jaden McDaniels, et cetera, right?
Supplementary guys.
But the third big challenge to pull this off is Bradley Beal's state of mind. So he's 27 years old. He's probably got 5 or 6 years of prime play left. He's only under contract guaranteed through next year because his third year left is a player option. So it's $29 million this year, it's $34.5 next year, and it's $37 million player option when he's 29, going to be 30 years old.
Okay.
He'll probably be looking to sign a multi-year contract instead of exercising that player option. And so if he's not happy after a year and a half, this year's a throwaway year. So you'd be putting all your chips on next year and hoping that you could re-sign him to a long-term extension.
Yeah.
You'd want some assurances that he would stay beyond the year, especially if you're going to trade Anthony Edwards in this deal. So those are all the things that you would have to consider to make this thing happen. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that that is too much. It's too much, and he's not. So if the Wolves were off to a decent start and they looked organized and Wiggy, of all people, wasn't ripping them, I might say to myself, you know what? I can sort of see this, right? This sort of works. But they're not. They're dysfunctional. Things look off the track. And here's my big question. If I'm Beale or I'm advising him, and I think it's a very fair question, and none of us know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
What is Karl-Anthony Towns, not his contract status, but what's his state of mind? Like, is he going? I feel like, unfortunately, and yes, I'm panic and I'm doom and gloom, but I feel like, unfortunately, we are nearing a tipping point with Cat where this might not go well. And if I'm Beale, the last thing on earth I want to do is jump from one train wreck that's going off the tracks to a second one.
But Beal's presence would make Cat instantly happier because they would just be an amazing offensive team.
Agreed completely in theory, but I would need assurances of that. Anyway, my point being is I love the idea, and I do think that Washington is just completely going the wrong way, and I guess the Wolves are in many ways too. All that being said, the things that you just laid out to me make it very difficult, starting with the fact that you don't have that first round pick. Like you sort of picked, if your Gerson picked your own path by going in the Russell direction, and that's the path that you explored and went down. And now you don't have that pick. And yes, it's top 3 protected, but it actually becomes even more difficult to make another trade now with a first round pick in some ways. So I love the idea. I don't know if it's realistic with this player.
I'll tell you where I'm at mentally with this, because I keep going back to, boy, this year's a throwaway year. So even if you get him, like you're not digging out of this hole in the Western Conference. You aren't making the playoffs this year, even if you were to add a player as great as Bradley Beal is offensively. So you'd be banking on a huge jump next year, and then showing enough next year to get Bradley Beal to either exercise the player option or sign a long-term contract to stay with you through his prime. He's deciding his next stop will be a decision. Where does he want to play out the rest of his prime years? That seems like a really tall mountain for the Wolves to climb, to all of a sudden be that appealing of a destination when you've been the laughingstock of the NBA.
Yes.
But I would almost rather bank on that to make Cat happy and to just like put a jolt into this franchise, then cross my fingers and hope that Anthony Edwards will buck 15 years of crappy young blue chip player development. Why would Anthony Edwards, and I get that it's a different front office and Gerson is different than predecessors, Tom Thibodeau and Flip Saunders, et cetera. But what in the last 15 years, starting with Rubio and Kevin Love in that era, basically ever since Kevin Garnett left, and into the Andrew Wiggins, Zach LaVine, Karl-Anthony Towns. Like Towns has panned out from an individual standpoint, but what makes you think that they're going to make Anthony Edwards into the best possible version of Anthony Edwards and turn into this development machine as a franchise?
Right now, absolutely nothing.
Beal is a finished product.
Right.
And so I would
I'm with you.
I would almost rather just like take the finished product,
Yes.
roll the dice and see what happens and try to build some equity that way.
But I think your grand point is you also have to get assurances from Beal that you're going to keep him and that he's going to say, I want to turn the corner of my career here.
But you're not going to get those assurances when you trade.
Here.
When you make the trade, you will not have those assurances.
But that's the problem then is, would they do that? And here,
you got to take a lead.
Here's my feeling. We have major problems if right now we're assuming that when Cat comes back and D'Lo comes back, if we're assuming that this marriage is not going to be great. Like if we're now sort of moving on and being like, okay, what about Beal instead of D'Lo? Because the D'Lo that we have seen sans Cat doesn't do a thing for us. And that comes back on Gerson. That's concerning. I understand that Russell and Towns have played 5 games together, which is a ridiculously low figure caused by the pandemic, caused by the fact that Cat's been hurt or had COVID. I get all that, all right? But the D'Lo that we've seen without Cat, to me, is not acceptable. And if that's the case, if he is basically a guy where we're like, yeah, you took a shot and we got major problems here with Gerson.
I just don't love the lack of alpha. Like D'Lo seems like such a beta.
But we're right back then, Phil. Like we're right back in the box of what we've been talking about since we started the show together.
But here's the thing though. Getting out from that Andrew Wiggins, and I get that they attached a first-round pick, and I get that Warriors fans think it's a fleecing because Wiggins is turning into a decent 4th guy, like role player. But like you couldn't go forward with that contract anymore. And that contract was 100% self-inflicted. So I still think they made the right move moving off of that contract and trying to get to the next thing, which is D'Lo. It doesn't mean that the next thing is the final thing. And if the next thing can get you to the next thing, which is Bradley Beal, you're not, just to clarify, like you are not going to get the assurance that you want from Bradley Beal upon that trade. There's no way you're going to be able to say, listen, man, we want you here, but please, can you tell us you're going to sign a 4-year max contract? He will not do that unless there's major steps forward next year. And then even then he might say, I'd rather go play for the Clippers.
The hindsight to me though of the problem with the Wiggins Russell trade is this right now, okay? Basically, it looks like you were exchanging disgruntled, sort of not very good fits, which is absolutely fine. Those trades have been made. They will continue to be made. But if you then threw in a first-round pick, like the Warriors, in looking at what they've done, you should have gotten them to say, you know what, let's just pull a 1-for-1 and throw in a second-round pick.
Well, I actually don't know that it's not a fit with D'Lo and Cat. We don't know. They've played 5 games together.
No,
the idea is that D'Lo's a great pick and roll. Not great. He's a really good pick and roll player at his best, and Cat is just like the guy that you would want to play pick and roll with.
No, but my point
Him
is,
and Jokic.
Phil, you threw in a first-round pick. That's my point. So if this was just you're not a fit in Golden State and you're not a fit with the Wolves,
But we don't know if he's a fit with
that's
the Wolves.
fine. No, I'm saying Andrew was not a fit here. So you flipped him to Golden State.
Yes.
D'Lo clearly was not a fit in Golden State. So he got flipped here. Okay, you take your chances then. Both sides might work for both teams, might not. What I'm saying is what looks bad to me potentially is then you were so desperate to get rid of your non-fit, you threw in a first-round pick.
Yes, but at the time of that trade, Wiggins' stock was basement. D'Lo was coming off a career year with the Nets.
Mm-hmm.
So D'Lo's stock was much higher than Wiggins' stock at the time of that trade.
Mm-hmm.
And now, because Wiggins has been put into one of the great NBA ecosystems of all time, and D'Lo has been brought into one of the garbage NBA ecosystems of all time, now their stock has either evened or it's possible Wiggins' stock
But why is this remaining a garbage? Here's what I don't get.
Cat's not playing.
But why is this? But there's more than that. It feels like it's just completely. Cat not playing is a big deal, and I get that. But it also feels like it goes beyond that. It also feels like it goes to a point where it again, and this is my problem. It again looks rudderless. That's my problem here.
I agree. There's a lot more than just. It's not like
if it was just Cat, I'd be like,
back,
okay, fine.
If Cat comes back, it doesn't fix everything, and I agree with that. But Cat not playing, like Cat has to play to get good vibes and to get D'Lo and Cat to mesh, and like everything is predicated on Karl-Anthony Towns playing basketball,
right?
And he's not because he has COVID.
Yep.
So,
but I need to see. But if he can't play and D'Lo does play, I need to see more. Like I need more from him. I can't just accept. Well, if he does not have Cat, then it's just fine that he can't play. I can't accept that completely, and that's been my problem. Is that when he has played without Cat, you haven't seen a damn thing for the most part.
Yep. Now, a lot of people who are the Wolves blogosphere is great. I mean, Dane Moore is a regular guest on this show, and there's a few others. I know Candace Hoopus does some film breakdowns. Key saying like there are people smarter than me when it comes to breaking down film that have done some digging on this and have said, listen, the Wolves, like they're not running the right plays for D'Lo.
Well,
that's
another problem.
They're not as organized and structured as like D'Lo thriving in Brooklyn was for a reason. He wasn't just freelancing for 40 minutes. Like they were running stuff both on and off the ball.
But why is that
played to his strengths?
Why is that not being done then, though?
Because it's possible Ryan's in over his head, which is another factor.
But I mean, that's
the youngest head coach in the NBA.
That's a big factor.
He's the youngest head coach in the NBA, and it's as much as I love him and as much as I consider him a friend. Like he is someone. Like if you were to say, all right, what's the likelihood that the youngest ever head coach in NBA history is going to succeed? You would say probably not very high. Probably needs another 10 years of, taking his lumps and going through the assistant grind. And so that's a possibility too. So anyways,
Deshaun,
real quick.